Kia ora, welcome to Shared Lunch, brought to you by Sharesies with BusinessDesk. Sharesies is a wealth development platform whose purpose is to create financial empowerment for everyone. And welcome along to the last Shared Lunch for 2022. Today we'll be looking back at some of our favourite episodes of the year, plus a couple of Christmassy surprises as well. First up, Dan, we're finally on the podcast together.
Isn't it good? It's nice
so
to have, just us. It feels like holidays already.
Yeah, well, my brain is already in the departure lounge, so warning to everyone there. How's the year been for you?
I don't want to be cliche, but it's been relatively long and precedented by the 2 years of chaos before it. That would be how I'd characterize it. What about you?
Yeah, long. I feel like my sense of time has gone out the window ever since March 2020. Everything is simultaneously so long and so short. I have no idea when anything happened. So, Christmas and New Year plans, do you have any?
Yes, so I'm having Christmas in Auckland with my enormous family. My immediate family is 31 people in my immediate family.
Good grief, sir.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we're going to have a very big Christmas in Point Chev, and then I'm just going to go to the beach for the entire January. What about you?
If you really miss me in your ears, in 2 days' time, you can tune in to hear me on News Talk ZB, because I'll be doing some summer hosting on ZB.
That's great. What slots are you doing?
I'm doing mostly afternoons, bouncing around quite a lot over the summer. So that will be really fun. That'll be really different.
I will be tuning in from an East Coast beach, sunscreen on.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah, book in hand.
0800 80 1080.
I will. I'll actually call in. I'll impersonate a character or something. Really test your on-air skills. Can you give us a taste of your shock jock skills? Can you say something controversial?
Well, I don't know if I'm a very good shock jock. I once had, I think it was Steve Braunius, was reviewing one of my books, and he referred to me as the nicest business journalist in New Zealand, which I'm not sure if he meant that as a compliment or not. I feel like a good journalist isn't necessarily all that nice. So I don't know if I'm going to be a good shock jock, but I'm going to ask people how they're feeling about their summer holidays and are the beaches truly terrible. I tell you what, if we hit sewage in the beach, I'll be raging. So, maybe that one.
It sounds like you're going to be a very uplifting summer host. It might be the nicest time in history to listen to News Talk ZB.
I hope so. We'll see. Or maybe I'll just slip into it and really embrace the shock jock. Maybe it'll just flip my personality 180. We'll find out.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah. All right, time to crack into it. We have each sorted out our 3 top picks from the Shared Lunch episodes this year. Dan, let's start with you. What is your favourite pick and why?
My favourite pick. My first draft pick, if you like, was Tony Alexander, talking about our favourite asset class in New Zealand, property. And both because it was a really interesting, informative episode about everyone's favorite topic, but also he was just very funny and very colorful, and it was one of the more zany interviews I have done on this particular podcast.
I love Tony. He just for one thing, he will just lay it all out there, which is really fun. But I've done some events with him, and he gets mobbed afterwards, like a full-on celebrity. I don't think you can say that about many economists, but people just love him. They follow his word to the letter. And shout out to Tony as well, that he said about a year ago when interest rates were super low and we had, I think, 2.69 or 2.99, whatever, it was definitely under 3% as a 5-year mortgage rate. Mm-hmm. And he said, lock this in, this will not come back. And I said, yes, very good point. But my mortgage is coming up in 6 months and I'll do it then. Like a moron. So I did not lock in that rate and I did miss out on it. And now I look back at it and I'm like, that will never come around again. So Tony is smart and he knows the market and he's got good insights, eh?
He does, yeah.
Do you think there's much risk of oversupply? Or once we get close to the right amount, people will just stop building even things that are consented?
If the buyers aren't there, the building is not going to occur eventually. But it's the discussion about oversupply or a shortage that is important, not necessarily the fundamentals. You see, if people think there's going to be a shortage of toilet paper, they will buy toilet paper, even if there's no reality to the situation. And if we now, this is something I said would come along at this time of 2022. I've been talking about this for over 12 months ago. I said, at some stage, we will choose to wallow in concerns about the brain drain, net migration loss, and at the same time, who's going to buy all these townhouses? We're going to wallow in the negative price implications of those two things. We're there now. That's why the vendors are capitulating and looking to meet the market. You've got all these things coming together. And for someone like me who's been around long enough and seen the cycles, when you see that sort of thing happening, you say, as I'm writing now, we're in the end game for this fall in prices. They're still going to fall further, but we're approaching the bottom in the next few months.
I love his point, and that's like classic Tony Alexander, comparing the housing market to toilet paper. But it's such a good point. It's like we never actually had a shortage of toilet paper in New Zealand, ever. Just people were so worried that we would, that demand just went crazy and people brought it up. And it's like exactly the same thing that happened in the housing market. And it also underlines the importance of the emotional aspects of investing and the emotional ways prices move. And I found that fascinating and very informative.
Yes, it is. It's emotional impacts on investing are interesting because I get a little allergic to anything that I feel that people are getting emotional about, but I still find it interesting to watch because even though the emotions might not be tied to fundamentals, they still end up moving the market in a very real way. So even if you rate yourself as an investor managing to stay unemotional, you do have to keep other people's emotions in mind and let that impact your decisions a little bit, being mindful of how other people are feeling. It's a tricky one. There are the numbers and the dollars and the cents, but there is also the feels, and they move markets.
Even on something as important as a house.
Yeah.
And the other thing Tony said on that podcast, which has stayed with me, and I found myself echoing to people in conversations, is, you know, one of the listeners asked, is now a bad time to buy a house? Should I buy a house? Should I not buy a house? And he said, a house is way more than just an investment asset. If you need a house to live in and you can afford a house, buy a house. It's not all about like, should I time it this way or that? It's like a place for your family to live, and you should like prioritize that over necessarily what thing might get you an extra percentage point or two of capital gains. And I thought that was just like a really useful insight in a time when everyone is panicking about house prices. At the end of the day, you need to make a choice that's right for you and for your family, and even if it comes at a slight financial cost, maybe it's worth it. And I thought that was like a great idea because it fights the emotion of it as well, because lots of people bought houses on the way up because they're scared it was their only opportunity, and now people are too scared to buy because they're scared it will crash. And it's just like, sometimes you just need to make the right decision that's right for you and let the money take care of itself. Yeah. It's really interesting whenever I talk about housing, because if you're talking about housing as your home versus housing as an investment, they behave two quite different ways, and people often see their home as an investment, and it kind of is, and it kind of very much isn't, because a house is also security, and rental laws in New Zealand, I personally think they're due for an overhaul, both from the landlord point of view and from the renter point of view. I don't really actually think our current system works well for anyone. Controversial opinion. But it's, it might be something where you're building wealth. It's more like an enforced savings when you're buying a house. It is to live in. You are saving a future cost. In terms of seeing it as an investment, if you're living in it, maybe not. But I mean, that's a whole topic in itself. All right, well, what's your first pick? Favorite episode?
Well, favorite episode, probably the one with Rod Duke from Briscoes, because he is a fascinating character, and very hard-nosed, but totally open about it. And I think you don't get to where he has without being very hard-nosed. So he bought Briscoes back in the 80s for $2. Although, of course, when you do a deal like that, you're not actually just paying $2. You're taking on all the debt, you're taking on all the liabilities. And at that time, Briscoes was losing $2 million a year, which if you think in 80s money, that's a lot of money. So he took on a company that was in trouble, turned it into a New Zealand icon. And I just find it fascinating, his approach, in that he's very focused on the wider aspects of the business that can make the front-facing part of the business that everyone sees and interacts with then work better. So he's very focused on in terms of the property side of his stores. He never wants to overpay for rent. That means he can keep the prices really low, and those sort of strategies are really, really interesting to me. And those Briscoe's sales that we all know about are because he's keeping the rent low by often being out of the way. Well, then you need to draw people to your store. So those constant Briscoe sales are about luring people to his cheap real estate where he can then have cheaper prices because he's not paying for rent. It's not necessarily about hard bargaining on the products themselves. And so he's got that really broad overview, but he's also willing to say things like, the upcoming year, we're talking recession for 2023 around most of the world, and certainly the Reserve Bank is predicting it for New Zealand. And he was quite open with, retail's probably going to have a tough time. I'm going to get through that by cutting someone else's lunch, like stealing someone else's lunch.
Yeah. And he does it as well.
Yeah, and he does. He's just saying, if there's only going to be a certain amount of sales, I want them all for me. And I like how upfront he is.
I try and eat someone else's lunch. Okay? So if there's 10% less sales available, because only 90% of the people are continuing to spend, then I try and steal someone else's lunch. And now that means that I promote more heavily. I do some other clever things in terms of my online and the sort of things that we promote into the market. Look, your budget's always there, but sometimes you've got to do clever things to get it. And sometimes you have to steal it off someone else, another one of your competitors. And so that's what we aim to do.
So good. And he almost has like a sixth sense for like what to discount, when to discount, what to order, when to order it. It's very impressive. And he seems to do a lot of it himself. He's not just some guy up in an ivory tower. He seems to actually be making a lot of these calls about when to discount things, which color cushions to order. I don't know if it's that detailed, but it heads in that direction.
Yeah, and he was one of the few retailers who saw the COVID supply crunch coming as well. And he started ordering more stock. And that was one of the reasons why Briscoe's did well when a lot of retailers struggled through COVID supply impacts. So it is, I always hesitate to get into that sort of founder myth, owner myth. I think you can see that go really wrong. But he is an interesting guy who's been around for decades. Retail is in his blood. It's all he's ever done. And I do feel like once people have been in a field for decades, they do get that sixth sense, and it's fascinating the insights they can offer you.
Did he ever get his helicopter?
Ooh, don't know. I do know that he has a Queenstown property that is so big that when it's talked about in the media, it's referred to as the family compound. So that's how rich he is. When your home is now referred to as the family compound.
You'll know who to call when the zombie apocalypse happens.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Next one for you.
Inflation Nation with our friend Brad Olson,
Love
everyone's
Brad.
favorite economist. Again, just like very entertaining episodes. I shouldn't choose just the most entertaining episodes, but also like inflation is the topic of the hour. I cannot go to a party without someone cornering me and asking me to explain why inflation occurs, which is quite good. If economic journalists usually aren't that popular at parties, so I'm really making hay while I can, But no, just good episode. Do we have a clip? Let's run a clip.
And the question at the moment might not be where is the best return that I can find. It's actually where is the least worst return. A lot of people are into that investing for the long term. I think anyone who's desperately needing cash has to make an adjustment or think quite seriously about where their money is parked up. But for a lot of people, and a lot of people I talk to, the question is more, how do I make sure that I've got that, sort of financial stability later in life or in a few years' time? That would suggest to me at the moment that sort of, staying the course is important, considering you've got to consider your financial risk portfolio and how you balance that out. Am I pouring money into places that are hugely volatile at the moment? No, I'm sort of keen to stick it out. But equally, I'm not putting my money into cash because I know that, inflation will eventually erode it all. A focus there primarily on that sort of risk tolerance, but also that question of thinking about longer term returns, and sometimes where's the least worst return at the moment can be at least another way of framing the question.
Brad is really good at looking at the big picture and then bringing it back down to what it actually means for people, though, and that's really good. The other great thing he did in the episode is like describe a police lineup of inflation culprits, which included Vladimir Putin, the COVID-19 pandemic, and our dear friend Adrian Orr, which I have not been able to get out of my head. Just them in the prison jumpsuits, police lineup, maybe doing the Andy Samberg song from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, if you know it.
Yes.
It's just it's burned in my memory.
Oh, R.I.P. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so great. It's so true. And to talk about, sort of the least worst response for your money at a time like this, it's true that in the last 6 months or so, everything's taken a hammering. We even saw that with, conservative KiwiSaver accounts even went down a lot, and I think gave a lot of those conservative investors a fright. And this is what, because people often... Same thing, you're at a party and people corner you to talk about money, which is fun. But if I'm a couple of drinks in, Lord, it's never investing advice, but it's especially not then. But when you're talking about shares and things, people will say it's so risky, it can go down. And yes, true that you need to have certain strategies and you need to be investing for the long term. But what people forget, and I think that's been the good thing about the current situation, is inflation is the silent killer for your money. That you have this invisible inflation force eating away at your buying power. You put it in a savings account, it feels safe, but those dollars are worth less every day because, same thing as why your gran goes on about how much milk used to cost. It buys less every day. And I think as much as this has been a horrible shock for people of seeing inflation really hard at work, it's a reminder of why we do things like invest, because you have to be staying ahead of your dollar going down secretly, silently, every single day.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to you. Do you have another standout episode?
Yes, and I think it's got to be Canna South.
Interesting.
Because, we talked before about people's feelings in investments, and medicinal cannabis, any cannabis-related products in general, people get really in their feelings about this, and they tend not to invest on business fundamentals. They tend to invest on the fact that either they really strongly believe in it as a medicinal product, or they really strongly believe that it shouldn't be legislated the way it is, and they're going to back the business because they want legal change, and it does get divorced from business fundamentals. And so I find it a fascinating topic to talk to someone who's trying to operate in a business environment where there is very strong polarized feelings.
Interesting.
Right?
Because I remember during the legalization referendum, the share price would move around based on the results. And the company was putting out statements, Canna South and others were putting out statements saying, doesn't affect us.
We are not recreational. We are medicinal.
Doesn't matter for us. It's not our business model at all. But the people just didn't care. The share price kept moving around. Fascinating.
Yeah, and then when the referendum result came through and it was a no, poor old Canna South did have their share price take a big fall. And again, they were just like, this never impacted us. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. And as part of the chat, fascinating, there was only so much we could talk about. We had to stay quite high level in terms of their business model and their products. He couldn't tell me what specific products they had because it's so tightly controlled. And even if a doctor wants to prescribe it, like we all know things like cigarettes, right? Can't advertise. That's normal, we understand that. But Canna South can't even go out and tell doctors what products they've got. They have to wait for a doctor to go to the manufacturer and say, do you have a product that could deal with this? And so that is a huge problem for the business. I mean, how many doctors have that much time or would think to go and seek it out like that? And so they end up in this situation where they do have a New Zealand market, but they're mainly targeting Europe, and they're pushing the whole New Zealand high quality niche products. And so often New Zealand businesses, being small to medium businesses, do compete by, we can't do scale, but we can do niche products that really, really hit this one problem so well, and high quality. and they are taking it to the next level. So as a company that is dealing with those issues that New Zealand often deals with, but with a whole bunch of extra stuff on top, fascinating case study.
That's really interesting. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that episode. You've sold it to me. Do we have a clip?
At the end of the day, Cannasouth has always been a medicinal cannabis company. And so, we've always been very clear about that. Absolutely, there was potentially people that were buying Cannasouth shares because they thought that a positive outcome on the referendum, in other words, legalising recreational cannabis, was going to have a positive impact for a company like Cannasouth. We obviously can't control that type of investing, but we were very clear that we are a medicinal cannabis company. And so, the reality is that it didn't change anything for us. We were continuing, and we continue to build the same things that we were building before the referendum, but it certainly created a lot of confusion and a lot of noise out there, if you like, which maybe wasn't helpful. But as I say, it didn't change anything on a day-to-day basis for us.
Right, honourable mention for a quick last hit of favour.
I found the beer market episode with Greg Fleming to be very reassuring. He's got a beautiful tone of voice, and he's just the person you want to talk you through a beer market. What's your honourable mention?
I love that. You do need someone nice and calm to talk us through.
Sometimes that's all you need,
times. Yeah, everything's going to be
soft
fine.
tone.
Honourable mention from me. Will green hydrogen save us? Because ESG issues, environmental, social governance, it's just going to get bigger and bigger. We are seeing New Zealand government is bringing in mandatory reporting standards. Other places around the world are. Investors are getting into it. We've got things like carbon credits that are going to have to be priced in soon. So any sort of ESG issue I find fascinating at the moment. And the green hydrogen, it doesn't fix every problem, but it fixes some hard problems. Things like heavy transport. How do you green it up? Well, green hydrogen, maybe. So I found that one very interesting in terms of how it keys into those wider issues.
Yeah, New Zealand is trying to get its hands on a hydrogen plane. It's all, it's coming.
Yeah, because of course, you've touched on an interesting issue for me. The electric planes works well once you're already in the air. Takeoff, hard. So maybe green hydrogen.
Well, I think we're going to upload some of these favourite episodes as little summer reruns. So I'll keep an eye out for the green hydrogen one. And I think particularly the Cannasouth one. I haven't listened to that episode and it sounds interesting. So that'll be, listeners should listen out for that.
Yes, high praise from us to ourselves. Great episodes from us.
Aren't we good? Aren't we amazing?
No, hey, thank you so much to everyone who has tuned in over this year. It's been really fun hosting Shared Lunch and hanging out with those people who tune in for the live webinars. I say it every time, but I really mean it. You guys send through great questions. That's really, really fun. And we'll have these reruns of the hot fave episodes coming in over summer. We've also got some more Christmas chat that will be in your ears soon. But basically, wherever you are, have a great Christmas and a new year. And we will be back with fresh episodes 2023. Catch you then.
Sharesies.